Why do you mistake nostalgia for wisdom? In this lesson, we're going to look at not only this question, but also multiple alternative wordings of it, so that we can explore it more fully and in a few different directions as well. I'm going to put those questions on the screen with some timestamps, so you can jump straight to the ones that call out to you most if you like. But essentially what we're doing today is 2 lessons in one, and this will definitely be a bit more technical and precise than my other videos. And the key book that we're going to be using for this is Ken Wilber's The Eye of Spirit, which has the most absolutely perfect and apt subtitle for all this: An Integral Vision for a World Gone Slightly Mad. So, with all this in mind, we're going to attempt to do 2 lessons in one and link them together. So first, to look at what we mean when we use the phrase ancient wisdom. So then we can stop overly romanticizing just pure nostalgia and confusing it with genuine wisdom. And then we're going to have a look at the metaphor of how a healthy acorn unfolds to become a great oak rather than staying as an acorn, and how all that links with self-actualization as well. So as I say, this is going to be quite a technical and maybe quite advanced lesson, which might be quite abstract as well at times. So I just want to make that really clear before we start. So the key focus to start on with all this is the confusion between ancient with a capital A and ancient with a lowercase a. So let's slightly reword the original question to address this first. So let's reword this to: why do you trust what is already finished to guide what is still unfolding? And we're going to introduce our first quote from page 60, which is in yellow, to flesh this out. So I'm going to put this on the screen just to make it all nice and clear anyway. Another meaning of the word ancient is old, archaic, and primitive. And indeed, many individuals who speak glowingly of ancient wisdom mean wisdom of past ages. And it is this past wisdom we are supposed to bring into the present culture as a source of meaning, stability, and salvation. And there's the key point. But already, you can see there is a confusion between past forms of truth with truth itself. And once this confusion is made, then timeless truth comes to mean what the old folks said. Now, if we don't apply much or any critical thinking, then we'll just end up copying old ways of living, and we'll struggle to accept that life moves on. So life does change. It evolves, it unfolds, and nostalgia, in this sense at least, is more like a melancholy for a world that we've not fully mourned and let go. And if we're stuck in the past, then we'll just end up living in repetition. We'll just keep doing the same things and repeating the same old words and living the same old life as others move on. And over time, the actual meaning and significance of those actions and those words, it becomes more and more lost to time. We end up just living on autopilot, not quite accepting that this time has gone, but not being able to fully look forward to our own future as well. So we end up in this sort of limbo, this little liminal space where we aren't quite anywhere. And no wonder we end up feeling anxious, because we don't know where we're going, or really where we've come from either, or who we are outside of repeating these old-fashioned and outdated phrases that the old folks said, just to go back to that quote from before. So to help break out of this really frustratingly difficult spot, we need to take a closer look at what we mean when we say ancient truths, which is why I've separated these 2 things out on here. So all of this starts with the word ancient itself. Now, Ken Wilber words this absolutely perfectly, and I don't think I could do a better job even if I tried. So I'm going to pass this straight back to him and quote from page 64 to help flesh this out quite nicely. Again, I'll put this on the screen just to make it all nice and clear. Now, if we use ancient with a capital A to represent radical, timeless, and formless truth, and if we use ancient with a small a for the particular past forms and expressions of radical truth, then we can summarize our major point thus: modern culture needs ancient truth, not ancient truth. And our corollary point, the best and most appropriate form of ancient truth, is now the neo-perennial philosophy, and not a blind allegiance to what the old folks said. So, in other words, because I know that is a little bit wordy, we need to focus on developing wisdom that is in line with these timeless truths. So when he says modern culture needs ancient truth, he's referring to this, not ancient truth, like this. So these are going to be referring to truths that aren't limited or aren't bound to any specific culture or era, but just to humanity itself. Things that were true, or just as true, 2,000 years ago as they are today. So ancient truth, the capital A, is understanding the wider point that everything changes without having to overly zoom in on specific examples. It's that to know thyself is far more important than just focusing on other people. In terms of shadow work, and to use more everyday phrasing, like what you resist persists. So we need to face and integrate these parts of us that we don't typically show to others. Like all of these are truths that can be shown, but never fully said or never fully articulated, because words will always fall short. So we need to rely on our behavior to prove our actions. Now, if you wanted to take that particular idea further, I'd suggest Philosophy as a Way of Life by Pierre Hadot, because there's a great discussion here on ancient Stoicism. The idea that there has to be a moral or ethical behavior to crystallize whatever thought or idea that you've considered. It can't just stay abstract, it needs to have this output. But back to the point for this, I am very much in agreement with Ken Wilber in that the modern world needs ancient truth with a capital, not ancient truth with a lowercase. So just to make this super clear as well, when we're talking about this, ancient truth with a lowercase a, it tilts us towards regression, and we're at risk of just cherry picking our favourite parts of other past cultures and times and basically forcing them onto our way of life, which can't really make room for them. So what we need instead is this healthy and honest view of what was going on at the time, so that we can accurately see both the virtues and the vices in balance. So if we look back in an overly nostalgic way at simpler tribal cultures, for example, then yes, it was typically a simpler way of life, and there was a stronger sense of community and one that worshipped nature. But at the same time, it was also a time based on survival mentality, which was based on fear, and there was a major sense of vulnerability pretty much all the time. And there was still ecological devastation, which meant that the tribes had to be nomadic, as they had such a major impact on the wildlife and the environment around them. This isn't about criticism or over admiration, but it's about getting a fair representation of what was happening so that we can effectively evolve as a species. Our grasp on the truth is becoming, in general, more and more accurate and more comprehensive. So by all means, look at specific things that others did in the past, that would be these, but don't confuse those examples of what they considered to be true with the truth, if we were to capitalize that. So if we try to summarize all of this in this first part, because I know it is a little bit wordy, we could try to say something like, align yourself with timeless truths that are just as relevant for humans then as they are now. So that would be ancient truth, the capital A, rather than old particular expressions of truths. That would be ancient truth with a lowercase a. Okay, like I say, this can be a little bit wordy and a little bit abstract. So we're going to move on now from the elephant and onto the oak instead. And I'm going to be dipping in and out of metaphorical language for this one, just to try to help make a wider point. So with that in mind, let's slightly reword that question again. So let's word it to, why do you worship the acorn instead of letting it become the oak? Or if you want to be a little bit more poetic about it, why do you search for truth in the ruins instead of the horizons? Now, as we develop and gain more in our individual lives, it also means that we have more to lose when it goes wrong. So new things to get excited about also means new things to fear in case it backfires. I'm just going to remove these word labels for now, just to make this nice and clear on here. So when we're looking at this, we need a mindset that is going to be psychologically mature enough to accept this, to be able to be in between this excitement and this fear. Because progress is messy, and we need to find a way to live with this tension of opposites and not get put off by new potential problems, because they're going to be inevitable anyway. So if we're going to face obstacles and face problems, they might as well be obstacles on the way to growth, rather than problems to overcome whilst we also retreat back into safety. And this means that wisdom is still acting, but with the right attitude and with courage. So it's still moving towards fulfillment despite feeling anxiety and ambiguity and ambivalence about the future. So instead of romanticizing the past, which we might call the ruins if we're being poetic, it's keeping an eye on the vision of the future and trying to actualize it. So that'd be the horizons. So just to make that really clear again, instead of romanticizing the past, we're trying to keep an eye on the vision of the future as well. So instead of romanticizing the ruins, we're also looking at the horizons. And to do this, what we need to do is we need to learn to differentiate rather than dissociate. These are two more important key words for all this. Like I say, I know this is a bit more advanced and a bit more technical than the usual lessons, but it's just to introduce a couple of ideas which are pretty pivotal for this. So differentiation, for example, that would be learning from the mistakes of our individual past and working on our blind spots, whereas dissociation would be ignoring them and just pretending that they didn't happen. So if we choose to live in line with this distortion rather than the truth, then we're going to struggle to make sense of who we are. So if we live in line with the truth, especially the ancient truths, to link back to that previous part of the lesson, then even though it might be difficult, it's more worthwhile. And ironically, it is actually very future focused, even though we are talking about ancient truths. There's a timeless quality to it and an acceptance rather than a denial and a refusal to see things as they actually are. So to give a personal example, I like to read to develop myself mentally, and I like to run to be able to develop myself physically. I think this is probably the best picture I've got to hand for running, so I'm just going to have to scope for that one for now. So I don't normally word it like this, but I like to read to develop myself mentally, and I like to run to develop myself physically. So just for the sake of the point, I'll word it that way for now. My identity isn't as a reader at the exclusion of being a runner and vice versa, because that would be dissociating those two aspects of me rather than differentiating them, which leads to a healthier integration overall. I have a mind and a body, and each of those does things that the other one can't do. It caused me a lot of unnecessary problems if I habitually dissociated from my body, from my mind, and just arbitrarily chose to identify myself as only one and not the other. Or if we put it a different way, I'll use different pictures for this as well. I need to look at my childhood and my conditions growing up. Where's that other picture gone? Oh, it's here. So yeah, I need to look at my childhood, my conditions growing up, and also to keep a close eye on the future of who I want to become as well. I want to see what helped to shape me in the past, but also how my vision of myself in the future can shape my present day sense of self as well. I'm not just idealizing my childhood and ignoring my future. I'm moving towards self-actualization as I become more aware of my unique gifts and my capabilities, which have got roots in my childhood. I'm integrating my past and my present and my future, whilst not becoming overly nostalgic for my past and drifting off into fantasy land or an imaginary future. So if we go back to our original wording of all this and our original reformulated question, I'm encouraging the acorn to grow into a great oak rather than have it remain as an acorn, regardless of how impressive the acorn is. I don't have a picture of an acorn, by the way, so just make do with this petal instead. It's close enough. So if I don't understand the process of development and progress and evolution, then what I'm going to see is this great oak tree instead is a complete violation of what it is to be an acorn, to reference a quote that I'm going to refer to in a second. So instead of becoming obsessed with preserving this acorn, what I need to do is I need to think about what is stopping it from becoming an oak tree. That's what the snake is going to represent in this, the obstacle in the middle of it all. So on a practical level, I need to see where an obsession with nostalgia is getting in the way of wisdom. If we go back to those word labels before, I need to see where ancient truth, in lowercase, is getting in the way of ancient truth in capitals. Now, I'm going to quote at length from page 77 for this, because it is just absolutely beautifully written. As always, I will put this on the screen just to make it all nice and clear anyway. To the retro-romantics, we say, you have confused differentiation and dissociation. You have confused transcendence with repression. The acorn has to differentiate in order to grow into an oak. But if you see every differentiation as dissociation, if you thoroughly confuse the two, then you are forced to see the oak as a terrible violation of the acorn. And thus your solution to any problem faced by the oak is we must go back to our wonderful acornness. The solution, of course, is just the opposite. Find those factors that prevent acorns from self-actualizing as oaks, and remove those obstacles so that differentiation and integration can occur naturally instead of drifting into dissociation and fragmentation. The solution is not an idealization of acornness, but a removal of the obstacles that prevent the acorn's growth to its own self-actualized oakness. So it's a very, very practical quote, but it is also very poetic at the same time. So let's just spell all this out, because I want to make it really clear with a couple of specific questions just to make this more obvious. So metaphorically speaking, let's just simplify it back down to these two. Metaphorically speaking, let's say you are the acorn and you're on your journey to becoming an oak. What are the factors that are stopping you from becoming an oak? And what are the obstacles that you are facing that are keeping you stuck as an acorn? And do you see the oak tree as part of your future and something to look forward to? Or do you see it as a fundamentally different thing? And where in your life are you accidentally idealizing your acornness instead of moving towards your oakness? Now, I realise that this way of wording things might seem a bit ridiculous at first, but we are talking in metaphors, so I'm just hoping that the deeper meaning sinks in. So if you are someone that does prefer a bit more like poetic or flowery language, hopefully this does appeal to you, just like we talked quite abstractly and quite formally and technically in the first part of this. So the key question really in all of this, though, is just to explicitly spell this out. Do you see the oak tree as a terrible violation of the acorn? And if so, what can you do, or what information do you need to help fix this confusion? And do you see yourself in your ideal future as you, or do you see it as a violation of who you currently are? So just to bring all this together, I would like to argue that information that is in line with these ancient truths are going to be considerably more profound and long-lasting and healthy and enduring rather than ancient truths with the lowercase a. This isn't all about blind allegiance to what the old folks said. And it's more living in line with your inner signals and with the world around you, with a clear understanding of both where you come from and where it is that you are going. And having the right courageous attitude towards the future, one that is tilted toward growth rather than safety. It's felt like a strange lesson, this one, and it's tough to word such a wide-reaching idea in a practical way. So even just as I'm talking now, just on reflection, I would probably slightly reword that original question that I said at the very beginning of this video from why do you mistake nostalgia for wisdom, probably to where do you mistake nostalgia for wisdom. I feel like moving away from why and towards where, it's going to be more practical. And rather than being stuck in trying to rationalize why, which might just result in repeating what the old folks said without much thought, it's about looking at the actual situation that you find yourself in and making corrections where you've realized it's becoming a bit too distorted. I'm always learning, and I never pretend that I have everything figured out. So hopefully this lesson is at least something of a practical example of how I actually explore these difficult and quite confronting questions and concepts, and to give you a practical way of separating out this idea of nostalgia from wisdom. This is part of an ongoing series, by the way, that is called Confronting Questions and Revealing Insights. Just in case you're wondering, you want to take this further. But in terms of book recommendations, we're in a bit of a fork in the road situation. So if you wanted to take the path of psychology and spirituality, and more specifically integral theory, then I would choose Ken Wilber and that path, and I would go down the eye of spirit route. But if you wanted to take the path of philosophy instead and practical action and look at the lives of some of the ancient philosophers who practiced Stoicism, then I would choose the book that I recommended a little bit earlier on in this video with Philosophy as a Way of Life by Pierre Hadot. These aren't competing one or the other style paths, but they're just logical next steps depending on what your temperament is and what your interests are. And I did mention as well earlier on this idea of psychological maturity as well, and living despite feelings of ambiguity and anxiety and ambivalence, which comes from an old favourite in this classroom, which is Creating a Life by James Hollis. So there is that path as well if you wanted a third option. And I've got a deep dive on exactly that topic as well if you are interested. But otherwise, I'm going to leave that lesson here because it has been a very, very busy one. I know it's been quite abstract and quite technical in comparison to other ones. But yes, I am going to leave that one there for now. So with that in mind, I will see you in a future lesson. See you then.